Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Flux Defense Raider. Pistol PDWs. What an interesting niche market. They're not new. They've been around for 100 plus years. In fact, even longer than that. You can go back and find percussion cap or even wheel lock or flintlock handguns that had attachable stocks or stocks built in. And they do fill a small category of need, be it want, or for PDW, and I've always thought, just personally looking at, and I've never been a motors cop, but I know the frustration that motor cops go through on their police motorcycles of having a more accurate firearm that's easily transported, easily carried. So I always thought these would be a great idea for motors, because you could take your handgun and you can still shoot it like a regular handgun, but you can also deploy that stock and have a shoulder supported weapon that's going to provide you with a greater degree of accuracy, and you're going to have the same barrel length that you'd get from a lot of submachine guns that are out there. So I always thought that that would be a cool option to have. Usually the problem is functionality and design. This, just getting into it, seemed to be one of the most purpose-built approaches to the category of a pistol PDW, or a handgun PDW, if you will. And I wanted to get my hands on one and do a review, and I wanted to grab the brace version to do the review on, because that's probably going to be the one that most people end up getting, to avoid the NFA nonsense of having to do a tax stamp SBR and things like that, even though you can, of course, SBR this. The cool thing about it being built for the M17, M18/P320 is the fire control group is the firearm. So you can SBR your fire control group and you can still take it out, put it in a regular handgun, do whatever you're going to do with it. You don't have to leave it in here, which I think is a brilliant feature of SIG's FCU, is it is the firearm and you don't have to worry about any of the other nonsense. So you can have a regular SIG P320, but also on the weekends when you want to, hang out with the boys, you can throw it into your PCC, pistol brace, carbine, or whatever. And still have that, and then be able to transfer it back to a handgun if you wanted to, or just buy another FCU. No big deal. What do I think about it? Well, getting into it, the design is very, like I said, very intuitive, and it seems to be that this is definitely the most purpose-built approach I've ever seen to the pistol PDW. Everything, I mean, it's literally a chassis system that takes the FCU and then you put your slide on it, and you can use your full-length slide, your Legion length slide. You can throw the carry length or the compact length on here, and you have a nice, what I call a trough of width, to be able to run suppressors, if that's, or put a comp on it or something like that. And then I have my 1913 mounting system, which is separate from the slide itself. It's not like I just get a stock and I still have to run optics on the pistol slide. So now I have a non-reciprocating optic, which sits at a pretty natural height for my shoulder support if I'm going to shoulder my pistol brace against something that's not a shoulder. Before anyone freaks out, the FCU that's currently in this gun right now is an SBR registered. So I can do this all I want, and you volunteer ATF agents can just calm the f down. Of course, this runs off SIG magazines, and it takes 2 of them. One of the cool features about it, just getting into features, is I have 3 ways to release magazines. I have a traditional right-handed release. If I'm shooting it left-handed, or if I want to use my support hand, I've got another release. And if I'm carrying a spare magazine in the not a vertical grip that's up front, even though, because this is SBR, I can do this all I want and not, again, piss off those volunteer ATF agents. Under here, I've got a release that drops the magazine that's fed into the gun and allows for a very, very fast reload versus going to a magazine carried on the body. The stock is rapidly deployable with just a single finger operation, just like that. I'm sorry, the brace is deployable. And then when you want to collapse it, you just hold that down, press it in, and it rides against that spring tension to lock into place. So this thing can be run as a handgun very easily. And then you could fire a few shots or whatever you're going to do with it, and then immediately deploy that brace to add additional support for your shooting if you so choose. If you were to SBR this, and I have the SBR version as well, which I'll get to in a second, now you have a very concealable PCC, if you will. You can start thinking of it as a PDW or a PCC. So I could keep a K-length suppressor on this, 2 21 round magazines in it. I've got 2 QD options for a single point sling. Can't really run a 2-point sling on this. And unlike a lot of other PDWs, I have an increased length of pull. A lot of PDWs have side folding stocks, the pistol PDWs. And they end up, because the stock doesn't want to be longer than the slide of the handgun, they end up being very, very short. The brace version is kind of like that, although I feel like I get an extra inch or two versus some of the other pistol PDWs that I have. The SBR version has a much longer length of pull, which is almost comfortably carbine or rifle length. So I do have to hug up on the gun just a little bit with this version. With the SBR version, it's much more relaxed. I don't feel like I'm bunching up on the firearm as much as I would be with the brace version. So that's about the features. It does have a manual safety. So if I wanted to bag this and not worry about, you know, just like I would a rifle, I don't have to worry about trigger protection. I obviously want to keep it in some kind of purpose-built bag that's not going to allow, you know, lifesavers and pins and USB drives and stuff to float around and interact with my trigger guard. So if I wanted to, I had that extra layer of security to have that active safety that I could engage when I off-body carry this in a bag or keep it in a lockbox in a vehicle or whatever its intended purpose is going to be. I can still run it as a handgun and then instantly deploy that stock and then run it as a not handgun or a braced handgun or an SBR if you're going to go the NFA route. So now that we got that out of the way, let's get right into the performance of the Flux Raider. And the very first thing, as you guys know, that I'm usually going to do is that 500 round burn down. Because this is technically a pistol chassis, I still wanted to put it through a 500 round burn down as well as drop tests to see if the chassis would cause any issues with the firearm maintaining zero, making sure the mounting system is robust enough to take the occasional bump or knock, or in the unlikely but possible event gravity is a constant, an actual shoulder height drop, which is how I do my constant shock loading, shock testing of almost anything firearms related. So here is your 500 round burn down. 500 rounds through a polymer frame handgun usually brings me a slight degree of worry because I worry about the polymer heats up, my hard points can loosen up and I can start to have functionality problems or cause permanent warping damage to the firearm. Flux Defense definitely didn't spare any expenses when it came to the polymer that they used to create the Raider. So first to last round of those 500 rounds, and of course the whole reason I do the burn down is to see if that increased rate of fire would identify problems that you wouldn't see shooting 500 rounds over a much longer period of time. So 500 rounds of the 2,000 round review gonna be that burn down. And I didn't have any issues with the Flux Raider from first to last round. Now the review gun I'm using a full-size P320 slide, and I'm using a P320 FCU versus the M17 or the M18. That drop-in FCU, I ordered one of their custom shop ones and threw that in there. And everything functioned great. It was exactly what I would expect. I guess it met the standard of maintaining that functionality first last round, the 500 round burn down. And then for the other 1,500 rounds, shooting 115, 124, 124 plus P, just getting a good feel for it, and what its advantages and disadvantages would be to fill that small niche that it's in. I just incorporated it in my regular practice, and they did some very specific practice that's kind of something you can only get away with a pistol-sized PDW or really short SMGs is from bag deployments. This thing works very, very well. It comes out, you can run your first couple rounds, emergency rounds as a handgun, and then that stock deploys so quickly. And it's an intuitive placement of the actual lever to get that stock out, the brace out, and be able to shoulder support if that's something you were gonna do. 1,500 rounds into it, getting to my 2,000 round. I really enjoyed the attention to design that they put into this. Of course, the question before we get to my final thoughts on it are, is it durable? Of course, I'm doing the drop test on it because it is a chassis after all, although technically it's a frame if you really want to think about it. It's not like I took a complete P320 and put it into this thing, which I'll get to that. I want to make sure it's going to maintain accuracy, so I did my drop test every 500 rounds. I'm going to do a shoulder height drop on the drop zone to see if it's going to maintain 0. Before we get to that, here's a 5-round 0 group I fired at 25 yards, shooting 124 grain gold dot. The cool thing about that is it shows you how inherently accurate that OEM P320 barrel can be. Shooting that, even bag supported with a non-stock supported, non-brace supported P320 full size, I'd be hard pressed to shoot a group that tight. And of course, we're talking about games of inches or games of fractions of an inches in some cases. But I was pretty happy with that 5-round 0 group. And then every 500 rounds, I did my drop test. So here's your drop test. And then finally, another 5-round group shot on 124 grain gold dot at the 0 distance of 25 yards. So I call that 0 maintained. I'm very happy with the durability and robustness, if you will, of the Flux Raider. Now, talk about the SBR version. So the latest iteration of the SBR version, one of the things I talk about is that a much increased length of pull. I don't have to hug up on the gun nearly as much, puts my cheek and my eyes in a very tall position. And they have new accessories. They've got this barrel shroud that you can add if you're not planning on adding a comp or a suppressor, which gives you a little bit extra peace of mind for protection from manipulations. And then I've got 2 Picatinny rails, 1913 left and right, and then of course the accessory rail that's the standard. And one big difference, I guess, from the SBR version than the brace version is it doesn't say anything about this not being a vertical foregrip. So there's that. It still has the 2 points of contact, much longer cheek weld because this is an actual stock. One thing that is different, the SBR version right off the bat, is I don't have a secondary sight channel to use my backup iron sights on this. I believe this piece is removable, so I could probably order that or email them like, hey, I want the open version so I could use my irons if I needed to. The shroud up here is removable, so like I said, if you want to run a suppressor, you can do that. But otherwise, it's functionally the same. It just gives you, like I said, a much longer length of pull, even though it compacts to a slightly longer size because of the overall cheek weld size of the stock itself. So my final opinion, this is hands down the best version, the best option you have for this particular category of firearm, being a folding stock pistol or a pistol PDW. A lot of attempts or a lot of models that are out there, they literally take a full handgun and they put it into some kind of chassis. And the chassis can be high quality and well machined, and those exist, and it can also be just completely trash gun store or gun show or swap meet counter nonsense. Some of them are very cheaply made, and that shows over longer period of times of use. I think a lot of people get into those cheaper ones because they literally are inexpensive and cheap, and it's them being cheap that makes them inexpensive. They use polymers that don't really have good specifications or tolerances from model to model. Cheap screws, no thread lockers or anything like that. So things, a lot of them just shake themselves to death. Parts start falling off or loosening up, and then you have to do a lot of more maintenance than you otherwise would. The Flux Raider, this particular one is P320 native, but it's literally just a frame, so I'm just putting a slide barrel fire control group in it. It's not taking a whole handgun and putting it into a chassis system, which I definitely appreciate that approach overall for the manufacturing. It's got every feature I would kind of want and be able to get on something in such a small package. And then, of course, the optics being mounted, being part of the whole system versus having to still go on the handgun, means I don't have that reciprocating optic, which is something, if I can get away from it, I want to get away from it. This is something that if you need a firearm that's going to fill this small category, it's great. And I think about this from if you use a handgun for home defense, especially those of you who have small kids, if you ever worry about having to scoop up a child and still be able to run a firearm, a full-size rifle with a suppressor on it or a shotgun or something like that may not be the best first choice you should grab if you worry about having to carry or cradle or hold or protect a child. A handgun makes a lot more sense in those situations. Something like this, you can still shoot it one-handed, still manipulate the controls one-handed, and if you had the opportunity and the ability to do so, then you could deploy that stock and go to a shoulder supported position. Even running suppressors on this, The one thing that I definitely have to say is it is very finicky on what suppressors it likes. It does not like K-length suppressors. I've told by the guys at Flux that it does perform much better if you throw the compact or the carry length slide and barrel and recoil system in it, and it'll function more reliably with those kinds, with that length of slide with suppressors. I just found a suppressor that worked well with it. My SIG Mod X9, I run it in full length, or even bringing it down to like a K-length suppressor runs great. It ran pretty good on my Dead Air Wolfman. Those two suppressors, it's going to run reliably enough that I'd trust it. The other suppressors, it was a little bit too finicky for me, for my taste, especially wanting the smaller suppressor to shorten the overall length. Because for me, suppressors, I'm just looking for something that doesn't literally cause ear pain indoors. And I think about from a home defense application, if I was to use the firearm inside, I'm probably not going to be shooting a 100-round string of fire. So 5 or 6 spicy rounds to the ear are definitely worth the trade-off of, you know, a successful self-defense situation. But that's a separate conversation. The only issue I experienced with the Flux during the 2,000 round review were suppressor related. And once I found a suppressor that worked with it, shooting subs or supersonic ammunition, it functioned fine, but it is a little bit suppressor finicky, so you have to be aware of that going into it. You could play with the spring weight, of course, and probably tone that out and get that reliability back. But just right out of the bat, or I should say the only thing I really have to mention about reliability-wise is suppressing. Other than that, I'm super happy with it. It's definitely something that I'm going to continue to use and find a niche role for. And it's just really fun to shoot. And it has really fast reloads, and it conceals very, very well. Could I carry it on my person? Probably not. I mean, I know I could. Probably not going to, just because it is a little bit too bulky for concealing appendix, let's be honest, even though I could probably get away with it. But off-body carry, keep it in the bag, something like that. Going in the locker in one of the vehicles, yeah, absolutely. It's something that's going to have a home that exists outside of just punch and paper on the range. So if you want a pistol PDW, if you want to get something that fills that role, just get this. I'm Eric Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.